Hi everyone, I'm Emily. Welcome to the Emily Dyes Fiber podcast slash vlog slash YouTube show where I'm going to talk about my knitting and crochet and yarn dyeing and other yarny projects that I've worked on for the past couple of weeks. If that sounds interesting, stay tuned. If you're more interested in the cross-stitching stuff, that'll be next week's video and I'll see you then. So, thank you so much for joining me this week. I have pretty significant progress to show you on only a couple of projects. So, let's go ahead and just jump straight into it. The first thing is I have a finished object since my last video. Now, I had shown you then that I was working on the 1898 hat. It's a pattern by Christine Burns, and it's this winter hat with a double thick garter stitch band with ear flaps. And at the time I had been working just on this garter stitch band. Since then I have finished it, and it's not quite even. You can see this side outside of the ear flaps is a little bit longer than this side because this side is the part that goes on the front. And so you get these nice, man, everything seems a little bit quieter now. You get these really nice ear flaps that cover your ears thoroughly and everything. And I like the decrease pattern at the top of the hat. It's just a fairly typical decrease pattern, but it's nice. The yarn that I knit this out of is Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool. It's 100% wool, not superwash. It's a very, I guess kind of more of a, woolly, rusticy, feltable wool. It was originally in the colorway Oak Tweed, and I overdyed it using reds and oranges and browns to kind of get a fall leaf inspired colorway. This was the one that I dyed quite a while back. If you look closely at the yarn, you can see how, hopefully you can see, how there's these darker strands within the yarn. That's the part of the tweed. It was originally like an oatmeal colored yarn twisted with a dark brown colored yarn. And so obviously the dark brown didn't pick up the colors as much as the oatmeal section did, so it still has this kind of marly tweedish look going on. And I like the hat. I'd mentioned last time that the pattern layout isn't the greatest. There's like information and then some key you need to know about that information is like down here, and you have to read this side column that's not all relevant and very easy to think you don't need to read. So there's that. The other thing that I'm not 100% in love with this hat is how, like I said, this is the distance between the ear flaps at the back of your head is slightly, very slightly shorter than the distance between the ear flaps on the front of your head. And it is enough that if you don't, let me tuck my hair behind my ear, like if you put it on backwards, the ear flap is like right here instead of being on your ear, you know, fully on your ear. So that's a little bit unfortunate, and I was kind of thinking that what I might do is put in like one or two, if I knit this again, which I probably will because I actually really like the pattern other than that, I might put an extra ridge or two, extra garter ridge or two right here in the front to make that difference just a little bit bigger so it's a little bit more obvious. But I like the fit, and I don't necessarily want to move more ribs to the front and take fewer from the back because then that will shift the ear flap back. So I don't know what I'm going to do about that. When I was trying it on as I was doing it, the headband felt a little tight, but after I washed it and let it dry, it feels really, really nice. So I don't know what I'm going to do about that, how I feel about that. I may just, if I give this to someone, just warn them, hey, you know, when you put it on, notice how you're going to want to have the slightly wider side to the front of your head, because there's no other clue. But that complaint aside, I will say I really, really like this hat. It hits all, like I like to have hats that fully cover my ears, and I don't usually like them down on my forehead, although with this one I don't mind it as much for some reason. I don't know what it is about this band, but I don't mind it. But I like them to cover my ears, and it does really nicely. It's double thick there, but this fits. I really like this pattern. I don't usually knit things more than once, but if I have need to make a winter hat again, I will probably be knitting off of this pattern again. And I have some more of this yarn that I've dyed in other colors that I'm thinking about knitting up into hats like this to be able to like give people hats and so forth. It does seem on the camera that these kind of like paler, browner sections are a little bit paler than they are in person. In person, there's not quite as sharp of a difference between this bright red and this pale section. And when I dyed it, I didn't pay any attention to this at all, but after it was dyed, it turns out that there's this nice spiral when I knit the top, and then down in the bottom, it's just fully randomly distributed. So yeah, that is the 1898 hat. It's a free pattern on Ravelry. I definitely recommend. Just be sure that you read the little side column. It's got a lot of like background information that you don't really need, but down towards the bottom, it's got some important information about how you do this band. So check that. So that is my finished object, and it's fully finished. I have woven in the ends, washed it, blocked it, all done, which I'm super stoked about. And it also kind of brings me to my next semi-finished object, which isn't really knitted even, but I'm still going to talk about it because it's kind of cool. I have been taking the ends of yarn that is feltable, that is a feltable yarn, and wrapping them really, really, really tightly to make a dryer ball. It likes to focus on my face. Let's make it focus on the yarn. And what these are is they're balls of tightly wound wool that gets felted in the washer and dryer. And if you leave them in your dryer, they help knock things around so nothing gets like, stuck in the, how sometimes things get stuck or they get folded around each other. Well, these help knock it around. And because they're absorbent, when you put wet clothes in with them, they're supposed to kind of absorb some of that water and then kind of release it as they're dried. So it's supposed to help with wrinkles. I don't know how much it's going to help with that, but I wanted to try it, and I had extra yarn, and so that's where the remainder of the yarn that I had after knitting that hat went, because I had taken the big skein of the Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool. If you're familiar with it, it's a big old skein, and I'd split it into either 2 or 3 parts. I calculated how much I would need roughly for a hat, and I split it into that many parts, and I dyed it that many different colors, and so I had some left over, which I put on here. And it turns out that my washing machine is too gentle to start felting these, because you want them to felt together, so that way these little strands don't move. Like, so this is partially felted, not as felted as I would like, but it's not going to go moving. And then there's some spots like here where you can see this moves freely, while the so this was what, 4 strands, and they've kind of started to stick together, but they haven't started to stick to the base. And so potentially this section that I've wrapped could slip off, and you don't want that to happen. So you want the whole thing to felt to make a hard ball that's not going to come apart. And typically you can do that by putting it in like a really thin, I don't have the thing that I use, like tights, like the toe of a pair of tights or something, and then wash it in the washing machine, especially if you do like alternating hot and cold cycles, because felting happens. So the wool has these little scales on it, and when the scales start to mesh together, that's felting. And I think similar to how like your hair reacts to hot and cold water, when it's in hot water, the scales kind of lift up, and then when it's in cold water, they clamp down. So when you like do it in hot water and the scales kind of lift up and they start to link together and then they clamp down, I believe that's why shocking it with cold water helps the felting process. I'm not 100% certain, but I do know that's one of the things with like the scales on your hair. When you wash your hair in hot water, the natural scale, the edge of the hair can kind of start to open up. So I think that's how, so the upshot is this was washed in like a hot load and then a cold load to try to shock it into felting together. However, pulled it out of the dryer, and there, so washed it a couple times and then put it through the dryer, and there was no felting at all on it. So what I ended up having to do, and what I did, was I took it to the sink and I took a little bit of just laundry soap, liquid laundry soap, and I like rubbed it around like this and went, you know, hot and cold and hot and cold and rubbed it more. And so I got it to start to felt. So pretty much all of this felting on here is actually hand felted in the sink in about 10 minutes because I could not get it to work in the washing machine, which I kind of like because it suggests that if something that shouldn't be washed in the washing machine gets into the washing machine, it's probably not going to be that badly damaged given that I couldn't felt rather feltable wool. But I'm also a little bit annoyed because my dryer ball felting process is a little bit harder. But this is now felted to the point where I'm not really concerned about any loops like slipping off the ball. So I think I'm going to just, without any protection at all, put it in with a couple loads of laundry and see if I can't get it to felt a little bit more because it needs that, it needs like friction and soap and temperature changes to felt. So I'm hoping that running it through like a hot load and then a cold load will help get that done, and then I'll have a dryer ball. I was thinking I might make it bigger, but I'm kind of liking the size, so I may just make another one with my next round of scraps. So we'll see how that goes. So that's sort of a finished object. This may be its final size. I may attach some more on top of it depending on how things all work out. And then the other thing that I worked on that I'm going to show you is I worked on my Hue Shift Afghan. It's a pattern by Karen Dimler-Lawrence. You can get it at the Knit Picks website. And it is basically a blanket made up of these mitered squares, garter stitch squares. Man, I hope you can see that whole thing because I can't see through it to tell if you can. And it's a really simple blanket. You join the things together as you go. You only have a couple seams at the end. And what makes it the Hue Shift is these colors, the way the colors blend together. And since the last time you saw it, I have finished this square, which is white. Oh, it's in the called for yarn, the Knit Picks Brava Sport. It's a 100% acrylic sport weight yarn, but I am making the squares a little bit bigger because I wanted a bigger blanket. I think ultimately I'm going to end up using about twice the amount of yarn that the pattern calls for, but it's not going to be, you know, twice as big on each side. It's because if you took this and you made it twice as big to make it a square, you'd have to make, it would actually be 4 times as big. So it's going to be, instead of like twice as big, it's going to be like half again as big. I don't know. I can't remember. I did the math at one point and now I'm just trusting that it's right. So I finished this square, which was white and cobblestone heather. And then I added 2 more squares. This one, so this is the row of silver. This was a row of black as its base with different colors mixed in. This was a row of cobblestone heather with different colors mixed in. This is the one I'm working on right now, is a row of silver. And this is silver and... I'm just noticing that that looks really weird. I don't know what I did. That's really weird. Oh well, I don't care that much. You won't notice it this far away. So this one was silver and black. This is silver and cobblestone heather. The next square is going to be a square of just plain silver by itself, and then we're going to carry on down. So this is, I'm currently working on the first quarter of the blanket. The blanket is 10 squares by 10 squares. This quarter is going to be 5 squares by 5 squares. And it's coming along nicely. It's getting nice and big. And yeah, I mentioned that one of the changes that I'm making is that I am making the squares larger. The other change I'm making is I wasn't really loving how these corners matched up. So kind of the way the pattern works is you start with this and then you decrease down, 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 down. And then you pick up stitches along here and then you decrease down, 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 down. And so I think what it says in the pattern, and I confess I don't remember the exact details. It's been a while since I've looked at the pattern itself rather than just my quick notes that say how many to cast on because it's very easy. But I think what the pattern suggests is when you get to this point, go ahead and use the yarn that you're going to keep, you know, kind of keep using that yarn and pick up the next sort of stitches. But what I was finding was that had a tendency to not look the greatest when I came. So if I did that with this square, and then I do this square and up, and then I come up and do this square, it's all fine until I need to connect this square that's diagonally upward to it. And it just didn't line up right. I didn't love the way it was looking, because when so I'm working smaller, 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 and then I'm going to go pick up along here, and so it kind of takes that top stitch there and pulls it back this way, when ideally I want it to carry on this way with the diagonal ridge that I'm creating. I'm trying not to tell you, real details of the pattern, but I hope that made kind of, so instead of having a little square piece that carried up into here, I kind of had a little rectangle that was pulling back this way, and then when I went to attach this to it, it just looked a little bit funky. So what I've started doing, you may notice with these little clippies, is instead of, well, that's not really a good example because it's at the top, but instead of taking this and then immediately attaching it here and going on up, oh, well, maybe that'll illustrate the problem. So I want this to be able to go this way, but I would attach it here, and so it would kind of pull back that way rather than heading out this way. So instead of using this right at the beginning, which may or may not, okay, to be fair, the pattern may tell you not to do, it doesn't specifically tell you not to do that. It may tell you to start it differently, but this is the way that a lot of people that I've seen in like the Ravelry groups talking about it are doing it, because it lets you keep using the same yarn you have fewer ends to weave in. But so I have been not attaching this here, which means that it's actually a live stitch. So I've just been putting a clippy stitch marker on it, and when I come to it as I'm working up this way, I will attach my yarn to it, so I'll attach the square that belongs here. Here, obviously I've already attached this square here, and then when I get to the square that's right here, I will attach it directly to this stitch, and that's how I will secure this stitch. Previously it was secured when I picked up the stitches going that way, but I didn't like it. It didn't line up quite right with the diagonal rib going up. That was probably a long and convoluted way of saying this, but regardless, I've started leaving little live stitches at the ends of my squares and just using these little stitch markers to hold them. Which I believe the pattern certainly doesn't tell you to leave the stitches live and put clip markers on them, because I would remember that. I don't remember what the pattern specifically suggests immediately going into picking up stitches, or if they suggest, tie off your yarn and then start the next one. Don't remember. But speaking of tying off ends, look, this is the back. I've been tying off every end as I go. It's not bad. There's about 2 ends per square in the middle, because, so this, for example, this square, it'll have no ends from, there'll be no ends from this yarn, because I am using this yarn in this square, using it in this square, and using it in the continuing square. So that yarn strand just keeps going up. There's 2 ends from this contrast yarn, because I started down here and I ended up here. So it's not that bad, and I've been doing it as I go, so that way I don't have it all to do at the end. So yeah, I'm making progress. To be honest, I had wanted to finish this blanket this year. I'm not even done with the first quarter, and it's the end of June, beginning of July. So yeah, I'm not going to be finishing that this year. In fact, I'm pretty far behind where I wanted to be on my stitching, my knitting and crochet and yarny stuff in general. I kind of set some loose goals at the beginning of the year, and I just haven't been keeping up with them. I've had a couple of things that I've cast on because I wanted to, and so now I'm kind of at this point where I've got more works in progress than I'd really like to have. I have more than I have project bags available for them, more than I have room for on my shelf of works in progress, more than I can work on comfortably in a month and see progress on all of them. So I am trying to get a bunch of those done. This is the first one. So I'm trying to get a bunch of those finished up. Some of them are like over a year old, and I just haven't worked on them enough to finish them. So I'm trying to do that. The other thing is I have too much yarn. And I don't have nearly as much yarn as a lot of people, but I'm living in my bedroom at my parents' place right now because the housing market here is insane. And so I've got a drawer unit, a plastic pull-out drawer unit to fit my yarn into. And because I like thinner weight yarns, I like fingering weight is my favorite weight. I like working with DK. I like working with lace. I can work with worsted, but not a lot, and I don't do any sort of bulky. It's actually really hard on my hands. So I can fit a lot of yarn into this drawer unit, and I'm willing to pack it in and everything. But I have so much more than fits into that drawer unit. I could, it's one of those 3-drawer plastic drawer unit pieces, and I have enough for probably 2 more drawers. So, I'm trying to work down on that, and that does not count the yarn for my shop. That is kept in an entirely separate location to keep my inventories separate. Not that I would confuse them, but just so that way I know if I earmark something for my personal use out of my yarn, I don't want to accidentally sell it, and I don't want to sell something, or I don't want to not sell something that is to be sold, kind of a deal. So I keep those separate. This is just my personal yarn. So I have more of my personal yarn than I can fit into that drawer unit, so I really want to get it down to the drawer unit. To be fair, I have a whole box of this yarn for this one, so that's a large part of it, and I'm working on that, obviously. But I'm looking over at my stuff of my own yarn. I want to knit stuff with the yarn that I'm dyeing because it's cool, and I have knit like little swatches, but I haven't knit like full projects. I'm working on a sweater right now in a Knit Picks yarn that if it comes out the way I think it will, I kind of want to knit it in my own yarn because I'm thinking that would look really cool in one of the colorways I have. But I don't want to do that until I've got my yarn under control because it stresses me out to have it sitting in piles randomly, not properly stored. So it's kind of like, I want to start these new projects with my yarn, and I want to start these patterns that I have, but I need to not. I need to finish the projects that I have now, start new projects that I've planned that will use up the yarn that I have, because I have yarn that I bought 2015, which again, for some people, that's not bad at all. Some people have got a, 20-year-old stash of yarn, and that's great. But for me personally, I like to have a smaller stash, and I like to cycle through it fairly regularly. So that way I don't have anything sitting around for a long time that I had a plan for, and then I no longer want to make that thing. If that happens, I want to find it a new project, kind of a thing. Just personally, I don't like to have yarn that I don't have a project in mind for. Sometimes it's a very loose project. I've got a bunch of yarn that the project in mind is, well, I'll knit some socks with it sometime. So it's not a specific sock pattern, but it's like, this will probably be socks, maybe some fingerless gloves, Okay, sock yarn is an easy thing to find projects for. I don't care as much about that as I do about other things. So anyway, this is a long and complicated discussion of saying that I have been feeling like I really need to focus on a few projects and get them done, so that way I can get the projects done, so that way I can get my yarn under control. Again, it's not very much by many people's standards, and I don't want anyone to feel like, who has a big stash, to feel like I'm being like, oh, well, I don't like this tiny amount. How could you like your... No, I know that some people love collecting yarn and some people love having a ton of yarn, and if I had the space for it, I would too, but I don't have the space. So right now, my goal is finish things, consolidate things. That means you're probably going to see the same project repeatedly. Rather than jumping around a little bit, I'm probably going to focus on 1 or 2. Well, okay, not 1 or 2 because I get bored too easily for that, but like 1 or 2 per video is probably all you're going to see. And it's not going to be stuff out of my own yarn because I need to get my commercial yarn under control before I'm allowed to start working with my own yarn. I've worked enough with my yarn base and stuff to know that it's good. Like, I'm not like selling you yarn that I've never used. It's good yarn. It's all fine. I just don't have full-sized projects, a bunch of them, knit out of it yet. So there's that. I mentioned my own yarn a bunch. I'm dyeing under the name Emily Dyes Fiber. I have an Etsy shop. I have a collection of 10 colorways inspired by butterflies. 5 of them are currently available on the Etsy shop. The other 5 I am finishing up taking pictures, and we won't even talk about the saga of taking like 30 pictures and then discovering they were all blurry, even though they looked totally fine when I took them. We won't talk about it. So I'm just getting stuff done, and those should be up really soon. I'm just it's taking way longer than it should, and it's fine. It'll be fine. So yeah, that's, oh, and the other thing is, with that, all that knitting I did in the past couple of weeks, I've also knit several swatches for my colors that aren't up yet, because I had to finish the swatches for them. So I've actually done a little bit more knitting than I showed you. I just didn't really want to show you these little swatches to show what it would look like if you knit my sock yarn into a sock. Anyway, I believe that is everything that I had to talk about. It ended up being longer than I thought it was, because I had myself a little rant about my stash situation. So I really appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments at all, please leave them in the comment section down below. If you want to see more videos like this, probably with less ranting, feel free to subscribe. And I do multiple crafts, so next week, if you tune back in next week, the video is actually going to be about my cross stitching, which may be something you're interested in. It may not. It won't hurt my feelings if you only watch some of my videos.